Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is a treat for me because I haven't done a lot of lives in a few weeks because I've been traveling and it's been hard, even though I've taken all my equipment. And Angela, who is going to be on the show, has been really kind enough to reschedule and do this again. But welcome to a live recording of Should I Start a Podcast for if you want edited versions of this show, go to shouldistartapodcast.com or find Should I Start a Podcast on all your podcasting platforms. It's basically for business owners who have a podcast and want to get more listeners, more revenue, more credibility by using that podcast. And today I have an amazing treat, a dear friend of mine, Angela Henderson, who has spoken at We Are Podcast before, has been part of the ecosystem for a while. She's a business coach. I love her take on psychology because she's a psychologist, and the way she starts thinking about things is really fascinating. She's had a podcast for a while, and we want to get into that and the conversation around that. But Angela, welcome to the show. It's really, really nice to have you here, and thank you for letting us reschedule this and do this from Brisbane, which is way better than doing it from a weird hotel room.
Hey, my friend. Always fun to hang out and connect with you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Let's get straight into the business. You're a business owner. When someone asks you the question, "What business are you in?" How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's really simple. I'm here to help more women get more wealth in their hands, is what I'm doing. And I do that in the role of as a business consultant. So ultimately, I'm here to help women make 4 and 5 figure months and then on to 6 and 7 figure years without burning out in the process. And when I talk about wealth, Ronsley, it's not just about revenue wealth that is in people's banks or the next launch. I'm talking about holistic wealth. What is your mental health like? What is your physical wealth like? What is your relationship wealth like? Because I think so often business owners are really prepared to just look at the dollar value and they forget about all this other beautiful holistic wealth that is surrounding them.
Huge, right? I think I refer to, when someone talks to me about entrepreneurship, I believe mothers are the original entrepreneurs because they need to be whatever they need to be to have this piece of value go out into the planet, whether it's the hug giver or the psychologist or the chef or whatever, right? And I think business owners are like that as well. And they got to be the graphics designer, the visionary, the implementer, the a salesperson, and everything in between. But there's so much value in the wealth we already have. Can we start to think of that differently as a starting point? Like, what is your thesis when someone comes to work with you? Like, what are the basic beliefs that we need to kind of like tweak a little bit to sort of get those results?
The number one thing is that we have to work hard to make money. And one of the primary things I see is money blocks that people have had from childhood and intergenerational. So you have to work hard for your money. Money doesn't grow on trees. If your parents filed bankruptcy, if you saw your parents working long hours, is one of the biggest things that I have to work with these women on is you can live a beautiful, rich life and not have to work your butt off, really. And so those are some of the beliefs that I see that people need to kind of start breaking down. Then you've also got things like imposter syndrome. You've also got things around, oh goodness, there's so many things. The list could go on here, Ronsley. But ultimately, money is a huge thing. I also think, again, if you think of society and in Western cultures in particular, is people don't cope well if they've got money, or they might not know how to manage the money because they haven't been taught, and then they lose the money either through gambling or drinking or drugs or whatever. And entrepreneurship is no different. So many of us are just learning as we go. We're making it up as we go, right? Everything, as Marie Folio talks about, is figure outable. There's no specific roadmap for any one of us. It has to be personalized to us. And I think that's the secondary thing that I see with the women that I work with is they want to download the exact blueprint from someone else. They want the exact roadmap. But the thing is there's so many variables that we need to consider. There's what is your business model? What is your personality? What is your human design? What does your family component look like? How much money do you have? And then we need to mold and create a tailored business plan and strategy that is going to help them grow. Just like I'm sure you would see when you're launching podcasts for people. No one podcast is ever going to be duplicated the same.
Yeah, 100%. And if you're following along and you want to know where to get, angelahenderson.com.au is where you go to find all the cool stuff she's up to and to listen to our podcast. But when you were talking about money blocks, that comes up so often in so many different parts. Not only, I mean, I think for women, but even for entrepreneurs that,
Oh, gosh, 100%.
yeah, like, I mean, I've got so many money blocks. I was going to say, I don't have, I think I've worked through, no, I don't think so. I think there's a continual continually find money blocks. I think the ones that I work through allow me to see a whole bunch of others that are there, that were hiding in the background from that one. The one that you say that obviously speaks straight to me, because I've come from a very different culture and I've started to embrace that, and I've been here for 21 years in Australia and learned this culture all over from scratch, because it's not the same. And I never realized that. So when you're talking about money blocks, I know that that is the big one that you mentioned, which is the hard work is what returns. Because, I mean, coming to Australia, everything was so easy for me, or easier for me, because the kind of work that we put in India is very different to the work here. So in terms of like output, I think I just kind of think that I can outwork anyone, and I feel like that is definitely something that. Do you see that a lot, and how do you start to break that down? This is like a therapy session for Ronsley, but I'll be keen.
Yeah, so I guess the thing that I always say is that, again, like, I will identify where things are. So again, money blocks, but it could also be subconscious blocks. And then we know, Ronsley, too, is that you might have a money block, but you could have, there's three primary subconscious blocks that we see when people are doing like rapid transformation therapy or hypnotherapy. And that comes down to, I'm not enough, safety, and like belonging, right? And so what happens is if people have those three primary things that are rooted underneath of them, it's going to stop them not only from money blocks, but visibility and a variety of other things. The fourth thing that we see from the subconscious brain, and remember, the subconscious brain is driving 97% of our decisions, is the notion of when, and this is not coming from me, this is data coming from Gabby Abrams over in the US. She talks about is when people hit the $500,000 mark per year or more, is there's a notion of loneliness. So, for example, I did some hypnotherapy, and one of the things that came up was this money block that I had. And what it came down to was, is my mom. And my mom was a nurse practitioner. She did all these amazing things, but then she had a back operation. She got addicted to oxycodone or indone over here in Australia. She lost me. She lost my brother. She filed bankruptcy twice. She gambled, didn't mean everything away. Now she sits in her home lonely by herself. So being able to understand when that happened in my hypnotherapy session was that the more money I make, the more lonelier I'm going to be. So therefore I stop being visible and I stop doing things because I don't want to be lonely. I mean, that was a massive eye opener for me, Ronsley, right? But so often what people are focusing on, I believe in entrepreneurship, regardless if you're a male or a female, is those how do I do this? What's next, etc. But when I started to shift from just the how-tos and moved into some of that inner work through hypnotherapy and healers, etc., it was a game changer for me. It was revolutionary for me. And so again, it's that level of enoughness, belonging, and safety are massive key indicators from the subconscious that accompany also the mindset money stuff that we're talking about.
Huge, right? The even the element of putting yourself out there, all those blocks come up. Like when you have a podcast and you're putting yourself out there, you could either cover something very generic which everyone could do and feel safe in that zone, or you could speak your truth and actually put a line in the sand and say, this is what I stand for. And those two strategies will have a big difference in how your podcast shows up. So let's talk about the podcast and let's talk about your journey. When did you start? What was that like? And how has that evolved to what it is today?
Well, I originally actually went to We Are Podcast, and it was John Lee Dumas was there, his partner was there, Kate, and I can't remember. I mean, my podcast has been going now for over 4 years, but it was whatever the year before, and I was like, I just showed up at your event. I didn't have a podcast. I didn't know what the hell a mic was. I didn't know what recording looked like, but I needed to be in that room to understand a little bit better about how I could use my voice in order to make a bigger impact in order to optimize my business, in order to have expansion. So I was like, I think I was one of the few people who didn't have a podcast. Here were these people with like amazing podcasts and they were killing it. There was Omar and Nicole and yourself and a whole bunch of really cool people in that room. And I left there and I thought, okay, I'm going to just get this podcast. And so I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I literally got some cover art. I like even shared it before it even went live. So when it actually went live that day, my rankings weren't what I wanted it to be, but I was like, well, I'm in it. Let's roll. I had like a $200, $249 mic that I've still been using up until just last year. And I just kind of rolled with it. I had no strategy. I had no plan. And sometimes I think that's what we need to lean into. Is if it's meant to be, everything is again figure outable. Lean into that trust, surrender that I was doing what I needed to do to get me to where I needed to go. And then the following year, I went back to We Are Podcast. You asked me to speak. And I remember I was on stage with Pat Flynn and we were talking about all these other people are like, well, I've been podcasting for years. And I was like, well, I'm only on episode 16 and I don't really have a lot to talk about. And I remember Pat Flynn stopping me and stop saying only. He said, you have more podcast episodes than most people will get to because most people will drop off around that 7 to 9 episode. He said, you have a voice, use your voice, believe in your voice. And so that really also was a game changer as I was comparing myself to someone else's chapter 30 when I was in my chapter 1 and just knowing that my voice will be heard by the people that need to hear it.
You know, that's such a great gift. And I was talking about gifts before we went live, and when people deliver these gifts that really shake us. Pat Flynn delivered one of those as well for me at the retreat that year because I actually asked him, I'm like, I don't understand why you came to speak at We Are Podcast. I don't really understand why all these people are here. And he got really mad at me. He's like, do you think you have no value to give? And it was such a change for me. And I am so grateful to those gifts that come along and really shake us up to our core. And maybe you've told me this before, but I never really knew that We Are Podcast started your podcasting journey. I mean, I know you spoke at We Are Podcast, but I didn't know that you didn't have a podcast and you came to We Are Podcast and that's where you learn everything. Literally, I'm hearing that for the first time, I don't know how many years later, but that just gives me goosebumps. And thank you for implementing and executing, because that's really why that whole movement started. How has that evolved to what it is today? Like, what's the podcast now? And what changes have you made since that launch?
Yeah, I mean, the podcast now is the Business and Life Conversations podcast with Angela Henderson. We will be rebranding in 2023, and that's just because over the last 4 years, I've evolved both in myself as a human being and both as a business owner and both as a podcaster. So the podcast will continue, but we're just going to name it slightly different. So that's something that's exciting for 2023. But what is it? I mean, where has it evolved? I mean, there's so much goodness with podcasting. The fact is that podcasting, I believe, amplifies things in your business tenfold more than any other platform. And I don't just say that for shits and giggles. I genuinely say that I can be posting organically on social media. I can be posting inside of my Facebook community. I can be sending out emails, and all those little breadcrumbs that I've just talked about add up to awesomeness. But the podcast, it drives traffic to my website because we also have an SEO strategy around it. I'm able to share that organically. I'm able to get on other people's shows. I'm able to bring on guest experts that I probably would never have been able to reach out to say, hey, can you write a blog for me? Well, why are they going to write a blog? That's work for them and it's going on someone else's website. But if I'm like, hey, do you want to come to an interview? All they have to do is just show up and they get exposure, really. But it's just growing me also as a human. You know, when I first started, I felt like I needed to do certain types of shows, like how to build an email list and how to do this. And I still do those how-tos. But as I've kind of learned more about myself, and I think podcasting also does that, is you learn more about yourself and what you're going to say and what you're not going to do. And you also go, you know what, this is my own freaking platform. If you don't like it, leave. There's the exit. And so I've kind of also grown my confidence through the podcast. I found my voice a little bit more through the podcast. And through that, also, it's allowed me to get multiple keynote speaking events at different, keynote speaking opportunities at different events. Like these are just some of many of the opportunities and awesomeness that I've had by starting a podcast.
And everyone knows you to be honest. Like I've done presentations, and there are some images with We Are Podcast on stage, and there'll be people in the chat that say, "Is that Angela Henderson?" And that's happened way too many times for it to just be a coincidence. So as a result of you kind of doing so much with your visibility and reach outness, and I think you have a strategy as to how you get the people onto your show. What happens? Can you give us an idea of what happens before you hit record, and what happens after you hit record? And I also want to get a little bit into the rebranding process. So let's start with that right now. First is like, what happens before you hit record? What do you do? What is the process like for you to get an episode to the record phase?
Yeah, so I have ADHD and I talk about that openly. So for me, again, the way that I have to do it is I have to write out my entire podcast, because if not, I will be off on different tangents. So again, you gave me the questions, or you kind of gave me a little bit of a framework about what was happening. That allows me to kind of tie things in. So for my own podcast, I literally have to spend about 30 minutes scripting out what's going to be said. Now, I don't necessarily read it word for word, but I know I need that script. So I've got thousands and thousands of pages of script, and people are always like, really? It sounds so natural for you. But I have to do that the way my brain works. So I spend about 30 minutes if I'm doing a solo episode. And I used to always kind of worry about what my topic was. Now I lean into what I need to say. So I used to batch record a lot of my podcasts, and that still works in some notion. But for me, what I've learned over the years is leaning into what do I feel like talking about? What does my audience need to hear? What needs a shake up in our particular space? And so that's how I kind of choose my topic for the week. Then I script it out. And then I just literally freaking record, upload it to Dropbox, and then my team will stitch it together. Like I try and keep it simple. I think one of the number one things business owners do collectively is they overcomplicate freaking everything. Don't overcomplicate it. Like really don't. Hit record, upload it, stitch it together, and get that shit out to the world. Imperfect action will always trump anything else. And the thing is you're doing a disservice by not getting your voice out and trying to make things perfect and all polished. I don't have foam boards in my room. This is how it is. I believe quality content, and it still needs to sound good, but I think so many people focus on getting it perfect that it's actually stopping them from getting their voice out. So so I really keep it kind of simple, Rons.
You mentioned imperfect action. Our dear friend has just rebranded her podcast from Socialette to Imperfect Action, which is so on point and on brand that I think what you're talking about is just getting the reps in, which is so important. I feel like everyone wants to make an impact on the planet, but they want to look good while they're doing it. And as a result, they want it to be perfect, and they never take the action as a result. And I feel like that is probably key to everything in terms of business, right? Is like just taking the action and then recorrecting that, getting feedback and getting and correcting that on the sharpening your offer on the, someone said this, sharpening your offer on the stone of the market, or something to that effect, like understanding what the market really wants. You talk about these scripts that you have. I mean, I'm for sure feel like your people will get so much value if you have those scripts and give it to them as like, hey, if you want scripts for all these things, here are templates that you can use. It will be so valuable because that comes so naturally to you. And the way you're telling me that you do your podcast, for me, I would find it extremely hard to do that, to be honest. But I love that this is your style, and that's how you find recording easy. And I think that is key. Have you seen that in your journey as a podcaster, that you like certain ways of doing a certain episode versus the others that are not really easy to do for you?
Yeah, and so again, it just works for my brain. Everything's feel light, everything feels easy, and that's one of the number one things that I talk about, Ron's, in regards to burnout. So if someone is listening right now, and I say on a scale of 0 to 10, how are you feeling right now? 10 being you're burnt out, 0 you're not. What happens is if you're a 7, 8, 9, or 10, or whatever that number is closer to burnout, you're really just not in alignment. So for me, I feel no burnout, no stress when I'm podcasting, because I'm 100% in alignment for how it works works for me. Now, as a business coach, I've now helped over 40 people get their podcast up and going. And I can tell you, each of them do it so differently. Some of them are scripted. Some of them just have questions. Some of them will do like an enormous amount of research behind it, right? Where others are like, they just show up. They're like, whatever happens, happens. This is the thing about podcasting is there's no wrong or right way to do it. I seriously believe it. I mean, yes, you still have to stitch shit together, but at the end of the day, as long as it's getting out there, people will tune in. I promise you. I don't know any podcast that has 0 listeners.
Yeah.
None.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you. So it's like the more, and the other thing that I also love is that it becomes an evergreen piece of content. Whereas your blog will only go so far. But when I look at my data every month, for example, I can still see people listening from a podcast 2 or 3 years ago. So that content just continues to live on, and your work that you put into it, you just get more return on investment as far as I'm concerned than other points. So I know there's kind of twofold in that particular question, but what I'm saying is do things that feel light and easy to do for you, just like you do for your business, but for your podcast, whatever works for you, make sure it's light and easy. As soon as it starts getting hard, you're not in alignment, and then that leads to stress, which leads to burnout, and then it can lead into a full-blown mental health diagnosis. Everything in your business should feel light and easy. Don't get me wrong, there's going to be hard days. I get that. But if you have more hard days than easy days, then I would really start to have you question, where are you not in alignment?
That is such a huge point. And I think we started to cover that initially with the Ronsley's therapy thing about working hard, because apart from my culture and where I brought up and what my heritage is, I'm an athlete. Like growing up, that's all I knew. I knew that when my back was against the wall, the only way out was to find a new level, a new version of myself. And you know what? My wife, Rochelle, who, says this a lot to me, she's like, I'm so glad that they shut the restaurant for you, because you'd still be at that restaurant trying to make it work. And I wonder at what point do we understand the difference between when is it time to kind of go, let me reevaluate where we're at, versus let me find a new version of myself to overcome this hurdle that's in front of me. I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, so my thoughts around that is when I used to be a mental health clinician of 15 years, where I used to diagnose people with schizophrenia, bipolar, anxiety, depression, autism, etc. The key thing there, Rons, that I say is there's 3 key things. When it starts impacting your home life, when it starts impacting your business or your career, and when it starts impacting your community, that's when I would be able to diagnose someone with a mental health diagnosis. If it's only happening in one area of life, then we need to go to that one area of life because there's a root problem there. So for you, Ron, is when it not for you, but whoever's listening, is when things start to get impacting all 3 key areas of your life is when you really need to start looking at what changes need to happen. Is it, again, you need to walk away from the restaurant. You need to walk away from a marriage. For example, I asked my husband on Christmas Day for a divorce. Now, some people might think, oh, that was a douchebag move to do. But for me, it was whatever you are not changing, you are choosing. Let me repeat that. Whatever you are not changing, you are choosing. And I didn't want to go into another year, 2022, with this, marriage that was impacting my home life, impacting my business, and impacting my community. So I knew that I had to realign. I knew I was going to have to do hard things. And so I asked for the separation. Now, it's not coincidence, Ron, that when Dale moved out of our home in March, that March was my biggest revenue month ever in my business. Why? Because I was realigning. I was letting go of what no longer served me or what expired, and I was welcoming in other things. So again, I've also, because I realigned, I've lost 25 pounds. I'm at Pilates. My meditation has been, I found a new man, all these other things. But whatever you are not changing, you are choosing. And so ultimately, Ron's, again, when it starts to impact all 3 areas of life, home, community, and your business or your career, then ultimately changes need to happen.
That's a really good framework to gauge when things are kind of going pear-shaped, so to speak, because it's so easy to push through because that's what we know. And I keep saying mothers are the original entrepreneurs. I mean, if there's ever an example of pushing through something that's hard, like you just see how parents do that, I suppose. So what I'd love to come back to in the podcasting sense is how does the podcast and what does it do for the business? And if someone said to you, hey Angela, is there an ROI to this thing? Is it okay, is this another cool thing for you to do, or is this actually benefiting the business?
Yeah, for me is I always look in my business, where is the return on investment? Now I knew podcasting, there was going to be some short-term wins, but I also knew podcasting, I was in it for the long haul, right? So the first thing I did is I actually paid 6 months up front for someone to take care of my podcasting, stitching everything together, because I was committed to doing this for half a year. So that's the first thing that I kind of went all in on. But the ROI for me, because I knew the ROI was long term, I couldn't just do 2 or 3 episodes and see an immediate win. So I was committed to at least half a year. And now obviously I've been going for over 4 years. But the ROI, it's like, again, how long do I have to talk about the ROI? I've got ROI because I use it as an SEO strategy. So people are finding me organically via going to Google. My ROI is that my visibility is increasing. Remember, there's only three ways to gain visibility, and that is through organic, partnership, and paid. So by having my podcast, which is produced by me and organically, obviously, again, I'm able to increase my visibility. If I can increase my visibility, more people know about what I do. If more people know about what I do, I can put my offer in front of them, which means I'm going to make more money. So I've got visibility awesomeness. I've got an SEO strategy that's in place that gives me an ROI for people to find me. I'm able to put my offers in front of people. Not to mention the beautiful relationships. I'm very big about human connection. And I believe that human to human marketing, the experience and interaction one faces with a particular brand, is where we're going versus B2B and B2C. And I believe a podcast allows me, even through my voice, to really build these beautiful relationships of listeners, but also equally build beautiful relationships with the guests. Also, another ROI is I get asked all the time to go on other people's podcasts. So I've been on 150 plus different podcasts over the last few years. Full disclosure, I'd say about half of them were from getting asked to be on the podcast. The other half was I was working with a podcast agency to get into the international market. So I just want to make sure I'm transparent with that. But I get asked to go on other people's podcasts. I get asked to do a variety of speaking events. So your event, I've been asked to speak at. I just came back last week from Profit First Australia, where I was able to be a opening keynote at their particular event. So, I mean, there's so much ROI. I can't tell you. I'm running a 2-day live event here this week, for example. The speakers, either they've been on my podcast or I've been on their podcast, or have been able to collaborate in some way. So, I mean, there's so much goodness. And then the ROI too is my mission is to make sure that another 2,500 women have access to the tools, community, and resources they need to grow sustainable and profitable businesses by 2025. And for me, Ron's, is that the podcast allows people who might not be able to afford, a business coach or a course or whatever, to still walk away with a 30 to 45 minutes really solid piece of content that they can go and implement and move their business forward without having to break the bank. So for me, the podcast still allows me to stay true to my mission and produce one free podcast episode every week. So yeah, those are just some of the ROIs.
I think if you had more time, it'd probably go on longer. I'd love to talk about the human connection before we get to the rebranding piece. You mentioned human connection in that comment, and you believe that that is something that we're sort of moving away from, and it's so valuable to have that back. Let's sort of reframe the human connection, how important that is for business, and how important is that for growth as a person as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I just think people want to be seen, people want to be heard. And in a world where we are, quote unquote, more connected than ever before, we're actually more disconnected than ever before. And I believe social media has a huge, they've got something to say for that. Our suicide rates are going up. Unfortunately, over 8 people take their lives in Australia every single day. And we're just more disconnected than ever before. I believe podcasts regardless of what type of podcast you have. Allow people into your world, allow people to feel seen, allow people to feel heard, allow people to feel connected. And more than ever before, businesses need to stop treating their clients like transactions. When's the next launch? When's the next seven figures? And I believe those people who choose to embrace human to human marketing, that experience and interaction one faces with a particular brand, that those will be the businesses who are going to accelerate and skyrocket, and those other businesses are going to get left behind. And a podcast, though you might not be speaking with the listener, I can't tell you how many emails I get where they're like, Ange, I'm ready to work with you now. You've been my virtual mentor for the last 6 months. I'm ready for more of you, because if you give this much through your podcast, what is it actually like to be in your space and work with you? And I would say that would go for any podcaster out there, that people just, again, people want to feel community. And more than ever before, we don't have community. I look last night, it was Halloween, and I look outside and there's this beautiful community because people have a reason to come out and celebrate. But all the other nights, there's very little interaction outside in my street. I mean, my kids play because they're forced to play outside, and there might be a few street kids, but people are just in their houses on these phones. And I think we saw podcasts skyrocket during COVID because people were so lonely that they could tune into their favorite podcasters and feel like they were in their living room, having a cup of tea, having a glass of wine, having a coffee. And I think it's more important than ever before. And I think podcast is a beautiful way to enrich people's lives in a better way.
Yeah, huge. I mean, I have this post-it note in front of me, and I'll read it out. It says, I use my voice because a lot of my ancestors didn't get a chance to use theirs. And I think it depends on where you're at and what you're doing stuff for. And when you find that why and you find the reason for your doing things, it really becomes easier. To your point, like you kind of are not flowing upstream or not swimming upstream, and you're going with the flow and with the current, and you're trying to like use the universe to your advantage. And to that point, you're talking. Let's talk about rebranding. We spoke about Steph Taylor, who also came to We Are podcast and has got this crazy result, and I find it very humbling, and I still get goosebumps about the fact that this idea I had helps these people have these impact in life and have their voice. Let's talk about the rebrand. People get scared of rebranding. I think it's a natural evolution because you do certain reps and then you realize a whole bunch of things that were there that you never realized before. But as a result of doing those reps, you're aware of new things now. What happened with your podcast, and as a result, how have you changed or decided to change?
I mean, I think, again, ultimately what came down to is if you think about the Business and Life Conversations podcast with Angela Henderson, it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to talk about business or life. But I really honed in on more that masculine energy, like I was saying at the beginning, like, 5 steps to doing this, or do this, or, whatever. But as I've evolved, I mean, I had my grandmother die on Christmas, my brother die on Mother's Day, a father type figure die right after that on New Year's Day, a business friend died 2 weeks after that, and recently a best friend from high school passed away in the last year. So in 3 months, I've had significant people pass away. And during that, you are forced to change in many ways. And so talking about, how to get your lead magnet up and talking about this, there will still be those types of conversations, but I've evolved as a human being. I feel deeper, I connect more, and I'm also here to make a bigger impact for women. And in order for me to do that, I need to get away from kind of those how-to conversations and really get into like, take fucking responsibility for your business and your life. Like, you can do hard things. Whatever you're not changing, you are choosing. And I'm here for a little bit more probably rough conversations, I would say, in the upcoming future Rons. But again, those people who will need to hear that will hear that. You look at, I had a article go viral in the beginning of January. And when I say viral, there's tens of thousands of shares and tens of thousands of comments when I talked about how I have a gardener, how I have a house manager, and how I have a cleaner. Now, when that went viral, I can tell you there was a lot of darkness in my world for a couple of weeks after that. I was told that my kids were worthless, that they would grow up to be deadbeats. What type of woman am I to be able to outsource these things? What a disgrace to society I am, etc. And I shared that on my podcast after all this happened, because here I am as So 90% of that population is not ready to take responsibility for their lives. They're happy to keep telling themselves the same old sad story, or they're happy to go to their 9 to 5 jobs, and they're happy to be in a marriage. I mean, that fucking is shit. Well, I'm here to make a little bit of change. And so when that article went out and we had all of that, do you know what I mean, emotion around it, here's the thing is that 10% of people that heard that conversation, that 10% of people that were thanking me, the 10% of conversation that was like, oh my goodness, I can actually ask for help and I don't have to carry this load. I'm here for the 10%. So I'm here to know that 90% of the population is not going to like what I have to say, but that's not where change comes from. So I feel this podcast has gotten me to where I am at. And the next chapter will get me to where I need to go even further.
Oh, I love listening to you. I love listening to the way you think and the way you act on that thinking, because it's definitely a journey. As the more you put your voice out there, the more you realize a whole bunch of things. And a dear friend of mine, his name is Philip McKernan. He's a philosopher, and with an Irish accent, sounds like a... Let's not go there. But he has this great quote. It says that your greatest gift lies next to your deepest wounds. And I find that more and more the case with everything that I do and I meet people doing as well. And I feel the most impact that we can have is by first dealing with our wounds and as a result helping other people, because there's such a level of empathy that exists as a result of helping people. And I think because of social media, and you touched on this, everyone's an expert, right? You can just put out some content and some images and say that I've been doing this for a while. There's so many people that, have are podcast experts and producers these days as a result of doing their own. And I'm not dissing them, because everyone starts at some point. I started the same way. But I think there's a level of transparency that needs to be there. What is your truth? And the more you speak that, I feel the more the universe aligns and makes cool stuff happen. Do you see that as part of your journey as a business owner, as an entrepreneur?
100%. I mean, there's a direct correlation that the more I speak the truth, the more the right people are coming into my world, and that those people who no longer serve me are leaving my world. It doesn't mean that I don't like those people. It doesn't mean that I disregard those people. It just means that they're no longer on the same journey and the trajectory that I'm on. And that's okay. I think one of the things that I feel as an entrepreneur, regardless if you're a male or female, again, is no one talks about the loneliness of entrepreneurship. And the more you use your voice through podcasting, the more that you grow your business, ultimately you will start to shed family members, community members, right? Family, potentially even partners, because you've done the inner work. You're now realigning yourself, you're recalibrating, and the rest of the world's not ready for that. And so sometimes there is a sadness and there is a loneliness that you can't really put words into. You just are. And there's days where I've had to cry, and there's days where I'm like, and I might have to mute someone on social media because they no longer serve me. Like I said, it doesn't mean that they're bad humans. It just means that they haven't worked on their inner work, and they're still, again, telling themselves that stories or their limiting beliefs or whatever. And I can't be part of those conversations anymore. My new partner, he works on the mines, and we often talk about, like, okay, you've got, you have your time to whinge about whatever's going on in the day, and then we talk about something else. But I also run from a place of gratitude. Where are you still looking at? Even in my darkest of moments, with all those people passing away, I was still able to find the sunshine when I need it. And so also, as someone who's gone through anxiety and depression, there's this kind of thought, just because I smile doesn't mean I'm not depressed. And I wrote this very fluent article once about it. And that was probably my most viral article that I'd written on my other business. Was there's this facade that people put on. There's this image that people put on. And it's always interesting when I work with women and I see what they're putting on social media when I first meet them. But the story they're telling me is very different, right? And so don't believe anything on social media, really, because there's the facade that people put on. So I'm here to break those facades down. I can dress up nicely, but I've also got a lot of shit Ronsley for showing up in hoodies and wearing flip-flops to events. And it's like, well, this is what you get. And the most satisfying and rewarding compliment that I can ever receive is when people see me in person, and they'll say something like, people always say never meet your heroes, is what they'll say, because they're never the same. But they're like, there's something about you that you are exactly the same human as you are on your podcast, as you are in person. You hug us. You make us feel like we're part of something bigger. You don't treat us like transactions, right? And I will always be grateful for that.
Yeah, huge. And I mean, a dear friend of mine has written a great book on grief, which I'm going to actually get off this call and Amazon it to you.
Yeah.
She's been through something similar, lost her dad and her brother, and she's a psychologist, a PhD in psychology, and writes all this stuff. And as a result, she's written this book as like a really, anyway. I think it's a really cool book. I'd love to send that to you, but.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned in this whole journey is about the shedding, right? The shedding of different things, the rebranding is the shedding, the people that come in your life is shedding. And the reason for that is because you're shedding your previous version of yourself and you're growing and you're so I kind of depends, I think, if the person is attracted to the idea of growing and growth and shedding the previous version of themselves, then embracing all these other parts is really part of the journey, isn't it?
100%. And there's no wrong or right way. As I often say, is you're right on time. So when someone will do a discovery call with me and they're like, oh, I'm just not ready, I won't hard sell them. I'll just go, you're right on time. You're exactly where you need to be. And whatever you believe in, God, the universe, Buddha, etc., is giving you exactly what you need right now. But often we try to maneuver and manipulate everything wrongly because we want to feel like we're in control. So I'm like, trust the process, trust yourself, believe in yourself, but remember you're exactly where you need to be. I'm exactly where I need to be. You're exactly where you need to be. And if we can learn to embrace that better, naturally things will flow with more ease and with lightness versus like this, like bashing heads against the walls. And so for me, is just embrace what you can, love what you can, be kind to yourself. But again, we're all shedding at different stages. The analogy I'll use on that one, Ronsley, is my separation from my partner has been relatively easy. I can look out my window right now and I can see his house. We live 20 seconds from each other, literally. You walk up the door, you go over this gate, and you're at his house. Now, that doesn't work for a lot of people, but that works for us, right? And through that process of shedding and finding out what works for us is we have to stay true to us. Often we want to stay true to what society wants, stay true to what the social media wants, but we do things in our own way. So for those that are listening, there's no wrong or right way. You're right on time. But I also, you know, with the separation, for example, is I wasn't dealing with domestic violence. I wasn't dealing with an affair. I wasn't dealing with drugs or alcohol. So for me, it feels really light and easy. But for the other woman who might want to be separating and, she unfortunately might be getting hit every night, it will be a different story. It will be a different shedding. So what works for me might not work for the other human being, and that's okay. But just trusting yourself, trusting the process, and knowing that you can do hard things and come out the other end, I promise, when you realign, things will be so much better.
So huge. Ladies and gentlemen, angelahenderson.com.au, Henderson with an HEND, for you to go and check that out. But thank you, Angela, for doing this. Thank you for sharing that story, and also for being an example, because it's not easy, I think, because of the structures that we've been brought up with. It's not easy to share the truth. I keep saying, and you mentioned how social media is this highlight reel. Everyone sees, all the good stuff and not necessarily all the hard stuff. So I thank you for being the example. I thank you for helping us all sort of find those things within us that stop us from achieving the flow and the impact that we can make. So I appreciate you so much. I appreciate all the work you do. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much.
Gosh, thank you so much, Ron.